Washington, D.C. As the clock strikes midnight on Capitol Hill and lawmakers fail to break their deadlock, the United States enters another government shutdown, its first in 6 years. While political leaders clash over budgets and policy, the consequences ripple far beyond the halls of Congress. Airports remain open, but a quiet strain builds behind the scenes. Transportation Security Administration officers, the first line of defense in aviation security, are reporting to work without pay. For now, flights continue as usual, but airline industry experts warn that if too many officers decide they can't afford to work without pay and stay home instead, delays and disruptions at airports could soon become unavoidable. Hospitals and patients face another worry. The National Institutes of Health, NIH, a cornerstone of medical research and a lifeline for patients battling rare diseases, is preparing to turn away new patients. Vital clinical trials and research programs are being paused. For families desperately seeking access to experimental treatments, this shutdown is not just a bureaucratic inconvenience, it's a life-altering crisis. For ordinary Americans chasing dreams of stability, a new home or a small business, the shutdown means more waiting. Federal-backed loans and mortgage approvals slow to a crawl, leaving applications stuck in limbo. For low-income families in need of government food assistance, the door to new applications is temporarily closed. Across the nation's landmarks, the impact is visible. Tourists arriving at national monuments, museums and parks often find gates locked and trash bins overflowing. For them, the shutdown is an inconvenience. But for the hundreds of thousands of federal employees caught in the middle, it's much more than that. Their livelihoods are at stake. What sets this shutdown apart from many in the past is not just its political bitterness, but its potential to permanently reshape parts of the federal workforce. In previous shutdowns, furloughed employees typically returned to their jobs once funding was restored. This time, however, some may find there's no job to return to. The White House, under President Donald Trump, is signaling a willingness to use the shutdown as an opportunity to cut programs it opposes and to reduce the size of the federal workforce. Many workers fear that the shutdown could become a turning point, leaving them not just temporarily unpaid, but permanently unemployed. While civilian workers brace for uncertainty, the Pentagon remains insulated from the worst of the turmoil. The Defense Department's funding was already secured under what President Trump touted as his big, beautiful bill, ensuring that the military continues to operate. Service members may face temporary pay delays, but their positions remain secure. Homeland Security also continues its work largely unaffected, including the hiring and rewarding of Border Patrol agents and immigration enforcement officers. The question now is how long the standoff will last. That depends entirely on Congress. The shutdown will persist until lawmakers manage to break their impasse and agree on a funding bill. Eric Ham, a U.S. political analyst and author of The GOP Civil War, Inside the Battle for the Soul of the Republican Party, joined a Washington-based news discussion to explain the deeper political dynamics at play. Ham noted that the situation reflects a breakdown in the spirit of compromise envisioned by the country's founders. When you look at how the framers designed the Constitution, it was actually designed to operate very differently from what we're seeing. It was designed to create debate, create negotiation, and move things forward in an incremental basis, he said. Instead, Ham argued, both parties have allowed themselves to reach an impasse. Rather than decide to continue to negotiate until they reach an agreement, one side or another has said, we simply will not continue to engage. And therefore, both sides cannot find common ground to actually move forward, which is anathema to what the framers actually decided. Although Republicans currently control the White House and both chambers of Congress, they still lack the supermajority needed to pass a funding bill without Democratic support. Ham explained, they still need 7 Democrats to actually get on board, to actually push this resolution through to keep the government funded. So they needed to find a way to get 7 Democrats, and quite frankly, they simply were not able to do that. In his view, the inability to secure those votes reflects the Republicans' refusal to compromise. In order to do that, they would have needed to have given something up, not necessarily give Democrats everything, but give them something. And what we saw right now was clearly they thought the fact that Democrats were seeking subsidies to extend health care to perhaps the most vulnerable people in the country was a bridge too far. What began as a high-stakes negotiation has now turned into what Ham described as a political game of chicken. Both sides are waiting to see who will blink first. For some Republicans, the shutdown presents an opportunity to achieve long-standing goals of reducing the size of government. Donald Trump has said we can get rid of a lot of things that we don't like, so this is actually advantageous to them, Ham observed. Asked whether Republicans were playing a calculated political game, Ham didn't hesitate. I do believe that the president's party has already done that, he said, pointing to massive cuts that had already taken place earlier in the year. He added that the shutdown coincides with a wave of voluntary departures from federal service. We also know that there are also going to be another 100,000 jobs that are coming off the rolls, those people who have accepted buyouts from the federal government. Those buyouts end tonight at midnight, so you're going to see another 100,000 jobs come off the rolls. According to Ham, the White House sees the shutdown as leverage, when the president was actually suggesting that somehow they could do additional painful cuts. I do believe that was a negotiating tactic to try to get Democrats back to the table. And more importantly, what we're hearing from inside the White House is they believe, Republicans do, that they have the upper hand, that the American people will blame Democrats for this. And moreover, they also believe that Democrats simply don't have the stomach to see a shutdown take place for a very long time. The perception that Republicans may gain the upper hand politically is not new in Washington's shutdown dramas. Both parties often enter such standoffs calculating who the public will blame. Ham suggested that the Trump administration believes it will not bear the brunt of voter anger. The Republican strategy, he argued, is to wait out the Democrats, assuming they will fold first out of fear that a prolonged shutdown will harm not just the economy, but also their political standing. But such brinkmanship is not without risks. Past shutdowns have shown that while short disruptions may be tolerated by the public, longer ones tend to spark widespread frustration and even backlash against the party perceived to be responsible. Beyond the political gamesmanship, the real question is how much pain the shutdown will inflict on ordinary Americans. Ham stressed that while the federal government is woven deeply into the fabric of daily life, many essential functions will continue. Many government employees will actually show up to work, many of those essential workers. And of course, they will be paid when the shutdown ends. So if it doesn't go too long, it's not going to have a tremendous impact on people's lives, he said. Key services such as law enforcement, the military, social security payments, and postal delivery will continue operating. However, for workers furloughed without pay, even a short disruption can mean missed bills and mounting stress. What we will see, perhaps, is some small short-term pain for many of those workers who will not continue to receive paychecks. But if it doesn't go too long, again, it will not be that dramatic in terms of the impact that it will have even on everyday regular Americans, Ham explained. That calculation changes if the shutdown drags on. If it goes perhaps longer than 2 to 3 weeks, then we could perhaps see some contraction in the overall economy, he warned. For now, the situation is a test of political will in Washington. Congressional leaders on both sides face pressure not only from their opponents, but also from their own bases. Republicans must weigh their desire for fiscal restraint and smaller government against the political risks of being blamed for disruptions. Democrats must balance their defense of healthcare subsidies and other priorities against the risk of appearing obstructionist. The framers of the US Constitution intended for debate and negotiation to drive the legislative process. But as Ham lamented, that spirit seems absent in the current climate. Instead, the shutdown has become a high-stakes battle of messaging and public opinion. As the days pass and the shutdown's effects become more visible, in longer lines at airports, delayed loans, shuttered parks, and research setbacks, pressure will mount on both sides to find a compromise. But in the polarized atmosphere of Washington, even compromise can be politically perilous. For now, federal employees wait anxiously for news, unsure whether they will receive their next paycheck or even have a job to return to. Patients hoping for medical treatment wonder when research will resume. Business owners and home buyers eye the calendar, watching as approvals and loans are delayed. And across the country, Americans are reminded that while political battles in Washington may seem abstract, their consequences are often felt most acutely in the routines of ordinary life.